So we're now going to jump back over to the experience track. And you've heard already today from storytelling, architecture, technology, all coming to experience. And I'm sure there's no one in this room that doesn't believe that our experiences are for everyone. And that's why I'm very excited and proud and honored to introduce this next panel. The name Lenny Larsen is actually a name that many of you from SATE know because he actually ran it for a couple of years. He's a seasoned theme park designer as well as an executive. He's done over 100 projects in over 27 countries. And in 2013, he suffered a catastrophic spinal cord injury. Well, I am proud to say, and proud just to meet him yesterday, that Lenny's back. And he is here to talk with Steve Blum about enabling experiences. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Blum and Lenny Larsen.
You go first. Thank you. All right, hi, I'm Lenny Larsen, and it's an honor to be here back speaking at SATE. It's an honor to be back in the industries in general. In 2013, I had an interesting experience that kind of threw my life for a loop. But let me give you an idea of what my life was like before my accident. Carlos, can you go to the next slide? So before my accident, I was an executive director of RGH Themed Entertainment. They hired me to basically establish and grow a themed entertainment design company while overseeing the design and development of a $2 billion project in the Middle East. I was a globe-trotting adventurer, traveling about 175,000 miles a year through like Corey said, 27 different countries, working on hundreds of projects around the world. And at the same time, I kind of had a parallel career as an internationally competitive springboard and platform diver and a diving coach, competing all over the world for the US and nationally as well. Now, July of 2013, I suffered an accident on a trampoline, landed on my head instead of on my feet, and life changed in an instant. It took me out of commission for about a year and a half, and in that year and a half, I worked really hard to build myself back to a point where I was functioning at the same level I was before my accident. Carlos, can you go to the next slide? So I'm still executive producing entertainment and experiences. I'm still coaching and judging diving events all over the country, and I'm still traveling the world. We humans are remarkably resilient creatures, and we find ways to get back to doing what we love to do, using an army of help. Carlos here, I couldn't do anything without him. He kind of is my hands, my legs. He's me, and be able to move in physical form. We use technology like voice control, wheelchairs that we can drive by mouth, modifications like ramps and elevators and lifts. You name it, we've figured out how to do it. It's a lot of improvisation, trying to get back to life as we knew it before becoming disabled. And I get asked all the time, or hear people ask all the time, does he know he's disabled? And it's you don't think of yourself as disabled. You're just doing life differently. Let's go to the next slide. And I'm not the only one. Most of us who find ourselves in situations like this, there's nothing that will stop us from getting back to doing what we love to do. And I've got friends that skydive. I've got friends that snowboard. They ski. They even scuba dive. That is a wheelchair underwater with a woman who's maneuvering that chair using jet propulsion underwater. Yes, it happens. So with innovation, with technology, with a little imagination, and a whole lot of determination, we can get back to life, back to doing what we love to do. And one of the things that I and countless others love to do, Carlos, can you go to the next slide here? We do theme parks. And the theme parks out there now, particularly Disney and Universal, have done an outstanding job of providing accessibility and accommodations for those of us who are disabled. And disabilities come in many forms. Visual, hearing, physical disabilities. So, I mean, it's difficult to try to accommodate everyone of every possible ability and attractions, but what's out there now really is quite remarkable. Modified ride vehicles, reflective captioning, assistive listening devices, curb cuts and ramps everywhere, accessible seating. Let's go to the next slide. Just a few examples from Universal's attractions. Vehicles that we can literally drive our chairs right onto. It's really quite remarkable. And you may not notice it as you're wandering through a theme park, but there are an incredible number of people in a park on any given day in power wheelchairs, in scooters, in regular wheelchairs, using canes, and you name it. Just because we're disabled doesn't mean we can't do a theme park, and it's really the accommodations that are there are really quite incredible. To give you an idea of what it's like to be in a wheelchair in a theme park, Saturday I went down to Disneyland, strapped a GoPro to this chair, and shot a few video clips of what it's like rolling through mass crowds at Disneyland and trying to get on an attraction. Carlos, can you go to the next slide? Now, keep in mind I'm driving this chair using a straw by blowing into the straw and sucking on the straw to turn directions, speed up, slow down, and navigating through thousands and thousands of people. It's kind of like a video game in real life. It's really fun when children turn around and see your chair moving at them, and then they stop dead in their tracks to stare, and you're like, oh God, I'm gonna hit them. So it's an interesting experience. Plus, if you notice, the perspective is entirely different. You're 3 feet shorter than everyone else around you. And you're constantly tracking what's in front of you, both on the ground and as far as people go. You don't want to run into anyone. You don't want to roll off a curb because that's going to hurt a whole lot. There's a clip here. Have we gotten to Small World yet? Yeah. Getting onto Small World is relatively easy. They've installed a lift in the boat. Same thing on the Jungle Cruise, actually. You drive your wheelchair onto the lift. It spins and drops you down into the boat. Small World was an interesting experience. On Saturday, I actually broke it. We made it through the ride, and then the lift went to raise so that I could get off, but it didn't raise to its full height, so he couldn't actually spin me to get off. So I trapped countless boatloads of people in what some might consider the 8th layer of hell. For a good 45 minutes. I felt terrible, but at the same time, it was strangely satisfying. That gives you an idea of sort of the perspective of being in the park in a wheelchair, being shorter than everyone else. There's viewing issues for fireworks and things like that. It's an interesting experience, but you make it work. You make the best of it, and thankfully there are all sorts of accessibility options out there. A number of attractions are accessible, where you can actually get your chair onto them. some of them were, for good reason, aren't accessible, like roller coasters and such. I can't imagine strapping this chair into a roller coaster and taking a loop or something like that. It'd be a little dangerous, but there's plenty to do in the parks while stuck in a chair. Carlos, let's go ahead and go to the next slide there. So I asked Steve to join me up here today, and Steve is with Universal Creative. And Steve, could you introduce yourself and a little bit about what you do for Universal?
Sure. So my name is Steve Blum, and I work with a bunch of engineers. We're responsible for all of the engineering and safety associated with the development of our theme park attractions around the world for Universal. And one of the responsibilities that we've got, of course, is to provide accessible rides. I've been working for Universal for about 20 years, and as I walked in the door, kind of before the ADA regulations were regulations, they had a philosophy that they wanted everyone who came through the front gate to be able to experience everything at Universal, and wanted us to drive in that direction as much as we possibly could. And we've heard today an awful lot of discussion of experience and that we should be guest focused, and of course the theme of being disruptive. So I'm going to start with the maybe a little bit disruptive part, which is this whole concept of ADA accessibility or labeling guests as disabled makes me a little bit angry, because it seems to me that it's a fundamentally prejudiced label. And in fact, what we're really dealing with as we look at all of the guests who come into the park are people who come with a continuum of abilities. I have some visual acuity issues, and on the other hand, I seem to have a very resilient vestibular system, so I can ride almost anything and not get motion sick, but a lot of our guests don't have that. If we're thinking about labeling people, what about children? They come with different emotional, psychological, and physical abilities, but we don't subcategorize them in the same way. And folks that we kind of traditionally have thought of as disabled really are just part of that continuum spectrum. And so what we're trying to do at Universal, along with folks who are similarly minded at places like IAAPA, is to embrace this idea of a neutral criteria, which is really, when we're designing an experience, let's define what abilities somebody really needs in order to safely experience that event. And if we define what abilities you need to have, that actually, from an engineering perspective, is a much simpler problem than trying to list all of the parts and pieces and all of the medical conditions and all of the extra medical devices that may or may not be acceptable to include in that experience. In addition to that, if you think about, for those of us who aren't labeled in that way, what do we do when we walk up to an attraction? We have some information about what is going to happen to us, and we make a self-determination as to whether or not it's a good thing for us to experience. There are lots of folks who won't go on looping roller coasters, for example, or who don't like rides that spin, and that you could, in one manner of thinking, say that that reflects a disability, yet we don't label them. So I'll get off of that soapbox now and say, however, what we can do is, when we're designing these experiences, we can broaden access by simply including some accommodations that widen that range of abilities that can allow folks to experience our offerings. And if we take the mindset that's in fact what we're trying to do, instead of targeting specific discrete accommodations, but to have a sense that the folks who can come to the park ought to have an opportunity to experience what we're offering, and kind of let the necessary abilities sort things out. For example, that it may not make sense to put a wheelchair on a high-end roller coaster, then we can get to the answer fairly quickly. And so I've just brought a few examples through my years at Universal of some things that we've done to provide accommodation. So first of all, we're trying to deal with considering a varying range of abilities, and those might be visual or hearing related or physical, as Lenny previously mentioned. Next slide, please. And so, for example, for guests who have varied hearing abilities, we can allow them to access our experiences by simply providing some devices that will give them some additional amplified sound, and/or we can give them written collateral so that they can read about the experience. And there are relatively simple solutions. We can, if you click for the video, we can run live shows, and if you'll try one more time. There we go.
Everybody scream!
And if you look at the person who's standing on the stairs to the right, she is simply signing what's happening in this particular show, so that folks who are hearing impaired can enjoy the show in the same way that all of the other guests can enjoy. And those are simple things that have been added through the years. Can you click to the next slide, please? For varied visual capabilities, we can provide, next slide, please. We can provide Braille. We can provide other methods for them to acquire the show content. And next slide, please. We're running a little short on time, so I'm going to rush through these quickly. For varying physical capabilities, which we've talked about a lot, we generally are trying to provide ways to either transfer into our rides if you happen to arrive at the park with a chair, or put your chair on the ride. So you can just motor through these slides, where in different attractions we've configured different systems that allow guests, who by the way are going to self-choose whether it's appropriate to experience this, simply the ability to access the experience. And so then they, for us, are put into precisely the same category as all of our other guests, which is they have some information about the attraction, and they have the ability to get to the ride vehicle, they have the ability to get on the ride vehicle. They would simply decide for themselves if they're going to participate in that experience. We'll end with a little video, because I think we want to do a little bit of Q&A if there's time, that shows a more recent accommodation. I think you have to click again on our Hogwarts Express train ride. There we go. So what we have here is a standard cabin that has been modified so that in a position that's directly accessible from one of the normal access points to the ride vehicle, the walls move away, the seating system stows, and we create a space and access so that a chair can simply be wheeled on board and put in position, and a guest who arrives with a chair can experience precisely the same ride in precisely the same way as a guest who arrives on foot.
So those are some great examples of accommodations and access that have really enabled folks of all different abilities to experience these attractions. We've got about 1 minute and 30 seconds left. If anybody has any questions, we can probably squeeze 1 or 2 in.
There's a lot of emphasis right now with the rise of attractions on 3D and 4D and VR. People who are visually impaired like myself, it's hard to experience those things fully. Is there consideration about that, or are there ways to accommodate that for people who can't?
Of course, visual impairment, again, is a continuum from conditions that, for example, make it not recommended that folks are exposed to some of the stereo methodologies that we use for 3D. And so we have non-stereo alternates for those folks. For shows that are principally visually presented and people who are at the part of the visual acuity spectrum where it's really not possible to deliver the show content in that way, we have alternate audio and or braille written methods to deliver the show content. But at the end of the day, there are going to be some practical limitations on delivering the experience in precisely the same way that a large percentage of the audience can consume that experience once you get to a place where the method that we're using to excite your senses is not really available to a certain percentage of the guests. So there are practical limitations. However, there is constantly new technology development that tries to access those experiences in different ways, and we try and stay as up as possible on those technologies.
Steve mentioned alternate ways to experience things, and that's a really interesting idea. One of the things that I found at Disneyland is that you can't get a wheelchair down a spiral staircase into a submarine. So they've got an alternate experience. There's a room and you're basically getting a live feed from a camera on the submarine. And you can ride along with your family even though you can't get on the submarine. And that's not just for folks with disabilities, but it's also for folks with claustrophobia issues, and they can't handle being trapped in a submarine for 18 minutes. So that's something that I would love to see more of, is more ways to alternately experience an attraction, either through VR or projection or what have you. We are out of time, but maybe we can squeeze 1 more question in if anybody has anything.
There's one up at the top there.
That's a really cool idea. It's something that needs to get explored, and I think that with where we're at now with accessibility and where we're heading in the future, I think those are some incredible ideas that can be brought to the table. Cool.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so very much.